Well, look at that, we're already back. And I mean that in two ways, because I've actually already covered Azure Striker Gunvolt 2 on this channel before. Back in the halcyon days of 2016, the very first episode in the Shooting Stardust series was a review of Gunvolt 2. I had to do it that way because I couldn't capture a 3DS game. Look at little old me at the tender age of 20. This was before I learned that super long recordings like this are impossible to get off my phone, so I don't do it that way anymore. Crazy to think it's taken nearly 6 years for the story to continue, because it felt like they wasted no time getting to work on the first sequel. Sumeragi's plans have been thwarted by Nova's destruction at the hands of Gunvolt, but some things just can't be left alone, for a new evil scheme is cooking. Gunvolt's new life, free from Quill and now living with Quinn and Zhao, is quickly thrown into disarray when Jewel, who lost her physical form after the last game, has her Septima trapped in a mirror and shattered into pieces by Zonda. Oh come on, you remember Zonda, right? The final boss of Mighty Gunvolt! Oh, and she/he was the adept ganked by Copen in the mid-stage of the first game. Speaking of Copen, he's had something taken from him as well. His sister, Middle, was kidnapped by Zonda's followers, aiming to create a nation for adepts known as Eden. So, a group of adepts rising up with pieces of Jewel in their possession, that's enough reason for both Copen and Gunvolt to go to work. But apparently Copen's security is pretty bad because Middle is kidnapped again, and when both him and Gunvolt reach the center of Eden's headquarters, the Garden, Zonda reveals her ultimate plan. See, Middle was actually the original holder of the Muse, but because her body was frail, she had the power removed from her and transplanted into Jewel, where it was eventually freed from her physical body once more. So, with the power trapped in mirror shards and its original body, this somehow gives Zonda the power to absorb the Muse and gain ultimate power. But not ultimate enough to not be stomped by one adept or the same normal guy as last time. But because this is Gunvolt, it's not a happy ending. Jewel still disappeared and Mittel is dead. I'm glad the series is currently 2 for 2 on killing the kids. Overwhelmed with grief, Copen lashes out at Gunvolt, blaming him as an adept for the conflicts of the world, leading to one final fight between the two, which ends with one killing the other. But I guess Middle and Jewel aren't quite dead yet, because no matter who dies, they bring the person back and protect them. However, the memories of two people coming together or something causes Middle to develop amnesia. Gunvolt decides to leave her in Copen's care, and Copen later decides to leave her behind, both coming to the conclusion that she doesn't deserve to suffer for their fights. Oh, what about Quinn and Zhao? I mean, I already told you everything about them. Quinn apparently took Gunvolt in, and Zhao is a contact within Quill. That's really it. They feel like they're just replacements for Quill in the first game, but without the implied history. This is in the face of setup that clearly implies more. It's established that since she lives within him, Gunvolt is the only person who can see Jewel. Except Quinn can too, and it's never explained why. If they build it into something later, fine, but you gotta at least assure me at the start that you have a plan instead of just blindly leaving breadcrumbs. Well, I'm a Kingdom Hearts fan, so I guess I have no room to talk. That KH4 trailer looking lit. The character angle thing also isn't helped by some of the changes in characterization. Jewel is jealous now. Like, I get it, they even touch on why that would be the case, but it's not explored enough to just not feel like a cliche. And not a good cliche either. Sakura Wars always has this archetype, and the best girl is never one that displays it. The battle with Zonda originally ended by asking the player to sing in Japanese. This was removed from all subsequent ports, and we are worse off because of it. The gist of the scene is that Gunvolt realizes that Jewel's song is within him, and he doesn't need to rely on her anymore, which explains why he was so quick to let her go in the ending. But when they cut the singing, they cut the entire scene, so He misses that bit of development now. But never fear, because Copen's cast picks up the slack. Middle fills the same sweet, innocent role that Jewel originally occupied and acts as Copen's morality chain. I do miss his more ruthless, angry personality from the first game, but I guess that would be a harder sell now that he's a protagonist, and this shows he can be a decent guy around people he likes. So it's good characterization for him. He also has a maid and she rides a motorcycle. You ever watch Excel World? Same thing. But folks, that's not all. Allow me to introduce you to Copen's closest companion, his battle buddy, the uncontested best girl of the Gunvolt franchise, Battlepod P-Bit aka Lola. She's outgoing, she's energetic, she's friendly, she's always willing to help, and she gave my man Cougar1404 endless material. Here's a piece of official art from Gunvolt Chronicles that shows she has a big ass, and here's a piece of official art from Duskdiver 2 that shows she has thick thighs. And she can sing. She's the complete package. Though her songs could be more divisive. Even in idle mode, she's a robot at heart, so Yurika Endo's vocals are put through a robotic filter. Basically, if you don't like Vocaloid music, I don't think Lola's gonna win you over. Okay, so even if I'm being honest about half the story quality, don't go thinking I'm all negative. There will always be that certain spark from the first game's original translation, but I might have been too harsh on the new style. It's still full of life. Teseo is the best example. They managed to fit that fucking hand clap emoji into his text. And I'm still emotionally invested in this story, and I don't think it's just leftovers from the first game. In fact, even more so than last time, the ending to this game filled me with a desire, a yearning to know what happens next. A Mega Man game, and I'm anticipating how the story continues. It might not even continue anything. Now that Copen has his own side games in a side timeline, will he have a place in future mainline entries? I also have to give credit for one small thing. Because the villain is established from the beginning and all the bosses are her underlings, the middle of the game doesn't feel wasted as we're actively and knowingly dealing with the main threat. And what about how that threat is dealt with? After all, this is a sequel, it should make some major strides in the gameplay. How has the art of playing as Gunvolt evolved? Well, the number of tags that can be placed on enemies is now a separate item, so you can use the gimmicky guns without fear of crippling your score multipliers. And I said the whole thing right there. Other than that, Gunvolt is identical to the first game. But that doesn't mean there haven't been major strides in the gameplay department. Allow me to introduce you to Copen. You know, again, the big selling point for Gunvolt 2 is the addition of Copen as a second playable character, like adding Zero in Mega Man X4. I miss his hood. The two are both part of the same story, you'll need to play as both to get the full picture, but they have their own events. Of the 7 bosses, the only stage both play is Tenjon's, so the two playthroughs don't feel too similar. Both fight every boss, so no one is missing out on the major content, but the ones whose stages aren't represented for a character are just shuffled around to the fortress. So, we have to ask ourselves, what was it like playing X4 as both X and Zero? Well, aside from one boss being different, the two were very similar. At the end of the day, it really came down to X can shoot from afar and exploit weaknesses on all bosses, Zero has to get close and has a shitty fight with General. The way you played them wasn't radically different. But the entire core of Gunvolt's gameplay was his Azure Striker Septima, something that Copen obviously doesn't have. So there must be some kind of more substantial interest, right? Right. In a sense, Copen can be described as more traditional. He fires normal shots, he gets powers from beating bosses. You theoretically could play it just like Mega Man. I don't recommend it, but you could. He just has one thing to set him apart. His dash. On the ground, it's a step below a Mega Man X dash, not covering much distance. But in the air, he rockets off, bounces off of everything, and it can be aimed. This is Copen's primary method of attack because dashing into an enemy locks him on and all bullets fly to that enemy. This is Copen's meta. Gunvolt learns the level well enough to know where groups of enemies are to get multi-kills. Copen learns the level so he can dash from enemy to enemy and never touch the ground to score a better combo. There's no doubt that it's a lot harder than Gunvolt thanks to how often you need to throw yourself headfirst into danger just to effectively kill enemies. And it's also a hell of a lot more fun to just go crazy. Do I know where everything is in this level? Not a chance. Am I even aiming for a high score? Nope. It's just so exhilarating to go nuts and bounce around like a pinball and see just how far you can keep up the streak. No wonder this guy got his own spin-off series. This is awesome! There are limits, of course. Each dash consumes a bullet, which can be refilled the same way as Gunvolt's energy, double tapping down. But he also gets one back whenever he hits something in his dash, so a skilled player with pinpoint accuracy who knows exactly where everything is has no brakes on their train. Similarly, weapons energy is shared between all weapons, but it automatically replenishes after a short period of inactivity, just fast enough that you'll always have access, but slow enough to prevent spamming. But there is something else connected to his weapon energy. Gunvolt has a flash field that activates when he uses his powers, which blocks all physical projectiles. Copen has his flash shield that does the same thing, except it pops up automatically, no thought required. However, it only activates if his weapon energy is full, so if you know a boss is going to be firing a lot of shots soon, stop using your special weapons. Which is weird, because in a boss fight, Copen's special weapons are his only defining trait, so incentivizing not using them is strange. What if this is your first time, you don't know when those attacks are coming? You want to be prepared, should you just not use your weapons? Yes, you should. Don't even worry about it, you do not have to be so careful. His name is in the title. This game was clearly designed around Gunvolt because Copen is busted. He has the same Pervasion ability as Gunvolt, allowing him to dodge attacks. This was balanced previously by it not working if Gunvolt was attacking, and using it would drain energy, potentially putting him into a precarious, overheated position. But see, Copen doesn't have a dedicated attacking mode like Gunvolt, so it would be impossible to say whether he's attacking or not at a given moment. So, he can always pervade. It still drains a single bullet, but running out doesn't leave Copen any more vulnerable. Just reload and you're good to go. All this meaning it's rare for him to actually take damage if you're paying attention. You're not holding onto a combo like this, but you're not dying. And his weapons, if you know which is whose weakness, can be disgustingly overpowered. Take a look at my endgame refight with Tenjan. He doesn't even get to do his desperation attack because a charged prism break does so much damage. Sometimes it's good that he has such an easy time because it doesn't always feel like this game was designed with Copen in mind. For most of the game, he has his own levels, so this isn't a problem, but the final stages are shared between the two characters, which leads to scenarios like this. This enemy's only form of attack is to fire a ring that immobilizes you, so Copen is encouraged to run into him, get caught, and fall to his death. It's a beginner's trap, one of only 2 deaths in this recording. To say nothing of the abundance of spikes, a real hazard for a guy who ricochets like this. Kinda weird how the design focuses like that, since the earliest concept for the game we've seen involved Gunvolt under Sumeragi control, so I have to wonder if he was even playable in the original draft. Yes, we have to assume a lot changed during the game's development, but how many of those were positive changes? After all, the first game had its share of issues, ones that could easily be fixed in a sequel. So, let's go down the list and see how they all stack up the second time around. The least serious was the heavy focus on score to add value to the game, and while the score attack mentality is still there, a second character does put some more meat on the bones. There's no single stage or boss I can point out as being irritating. Challenges don't have to be manually selected to be attempted, even if the stage they belong to still has to be completed once. Alright, let's cut straight to the chase. The biggest problem with the first game was the method to reach the true ending, having to find a bunch of items and play the final stage twice. So clearly, Inti Creates really looked at themselves, examined it, and said, let's make it a little bit better but worse at the same time. There's no collectible this time around. The only requirement to reaching the true ending is to beat the game with both characters. Which means you beat the game as Gunvolt, beat it as Copen, and immediately move into the true ending, right? Yeah, that makes sense, wouldn't it? You have to beat the game with both characters. Doing so unlocks the ability to reach the true ending, but you still have to replay the final stage with both characters if you want to see their individual endings. I could say the same about the first game, but I really want to bring it up here. Why couldn't the true final boss be considered a separate stage, one that's immediately selectable once the requirement is met? There was something I did say the first time, and I'll say it again, this could have been changed with the Striker pack. Seeing as the bad ending just cuts off earlier, you wouldn't even lose anything not having it in the first place. Oh, and this time the stage you have to replay includes the boss rush. So, not only does it take longer to complete the stage, you also have to fight the bosses more than necessary. This is only a problem because this game falls into the same trap as a lot of sequels. It's meant for people who had already gotten good at the original. It's definitely not the worst on that front. Something like Doom Eternal was so much harder than the first one that I wanted to slap some sense into the director and say, "It's time to stop!" I only died here twice, but boss patterns are cranked up to the point where I don't really know how they're supposed to be avoided. This is turning into a bullet hell. I mean, Tension's refight has a final attack so dangerous, the game literally expects you to die, even though you're not supposed to. And it really doesn't help when their attacks get hidden behind the damn subtitles. People who complained about the lack of mid-stage dialogue in the first game's first translation say that the game is built around the subtitles, popping up only in empty segments to not get in the way. Oh yeah, so why does this game have them during the bosses? It doesn't matter how much development this gives the characters when I'm way too busy surviving to read any of it. This kind of thing works in a game like Kid Icarus Uprising, both because the subtitles and portraits can be put on the bottom screen so they're not in the way, but also that game has English audio. You don't have to take your eyes off the action to understand what's happening. In Japanese, it's no problem, it just doesn't translate well. Yes, you can turn it off. Let's recap on this one. The original Azure Striker Gunvolt was a great game, but it had a slew of issues. Azure Striker Gunvolt 2 makes the good stuff even better, but at the same time exacerbates the same flaws. How am I supposed to rate something like that? How can I say for certain that I prefer this game when that's the case? Because I do. Gunvolt's just as good as he was last time, and I really think Copen adds a lot. But I guess I can't put my foot down and say for certain it's an improvement. At best, I could say it's just as good as the first game, which, that's good. It earns a recommendation on that alone. But it's not where it should be. At least Inti Creates knew what worked from this game and focused their next efforts exclusively on developing Copen. And yeah, the gameplay design of Gunvolt Chronicles was the best it's ever been. My problem was the further increased difficulty and lack of attention to the story. But damn did they love Copen, because even after Gunvolt 3 had been announced, Gunvolt Chronicles 2 popped up out of nowhere and released first. But finally, Azure Striker Gunvolt 3 is coming, and we can see how the story continues. But that's for another time.
Girls will be boys and boys will